Number 1, what is your name, please?
My name is Ed Edwards.
Number 2.
My name is Ed Edwards.
Number 3.
My name is Ed Edwards.
And here is the extraordinary story of Ed Edwards. I think you'll find it profitable. It says, I, Ed Edwards, was once on the FBI's list of the 10 most wanted criminals in America. Now I am a respected citizen in my community. Here's the story of my dramatic turnabout. As a young boy, I felt that the only way I could gain any recognition was to steal. Eventually, I committed armed robberies, impersonated a federal officer, and was sought for questioning about a double murder. I spent time in the federal penitentiaries in Leavenworth and Lewisburg. It was at the latter prison that I started vocational training and very slowly began to realize that I could still be somebody and return to my rightful and legal place in society.
Hello everyone, welcome to another Brain Scratch, and if you're curious, this man, number 3, was actually Ed Edwards. This is a clip from an old television show called To Tell the Truth. And Ed Edwards appeared on that show. He had actually a few television appearances. And as you heard here, his early story was he had a life of crime, turned it around. He actually wound up writing a book and then giving lectures and interviews based on that book. However, Edward Wayne Edwards, his name has been coming up in my comments, in my inbox. It's been coming up a lot. And when I did some searching on him today to prep for this episode, I reviewed many other videos with a lot of different accusations about this man. I'm starting to consider him the Santa Claus of murder. Now, just to give you a brief on it, he did admit to and was convicted of 5 murders. However, the internet is totally abuzz right now with trying to pin a lot of high-profile murders on him on top of the ones that he admitted to. For example, the case that we covered last week, the Adam Walsh case, people are trying to tie him into that. The JonBenet Ramsey case is another example. Even the Stephen Avery case, the Making a Murderer Netflix show, people are saying that was all done by Ed Edwards and that he set up Stephen Avery. As a matter of fact, probably the most famous of cases is that of the Zodiac Killer. And people are saying he was in the right place at the right time. And according to his personality that we can kind of get from these pieces of media, he might be a match for the Zodiac Killer. So we're going to dive into this today. Before I start, I have to give a huge thank you to Hawaiian 808 Girl. You've probably seen her in the comments. She's pretty active in the comment threads. I'm sure she'll be commenting on this video for sure. She has done a lot of work on this. She has read his book as well as a new book that is trying to put some of these new crimes on Ed Edwards. And on top of that, she did some very good research in terms of public records, trying to verify the information that she saw in the books. And she even found some information that the author of the recent book didn't have, so we've kicked that his way. We're going to get into him a bit through this investigation as well. And we actually have a PowerPoint presentation put together by Hawaiian 808 Girl that I will be featuring on BrainScratchers.com, so you guys can go and check it out in the deep dive files section of BrainScratchers.com. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to cover all of her research, so that's a place where you guys can go see the raw research that was sent to me and do some more digging on your own and see if you can come up with some different conclusions than we did. But let's continue. Starting at Wikipedia, Ed Edwards, serial killer, born June 14th, 1933, lived until April 7th, 2011, was a convicted American serial killer. Edwards escaped from jail in Akron, Ohio in 1955 by pushing past a guard and fled across the country, holding up gas stations for money. In 1961, he landed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. He eventually was captured and arrested in Atlanta, Georgia on January 20th, 1962, paroled in 1967, and between 1977 and 1996, he murdered at least 5 people and is suspected in many other killings as well. We're going to go into his background, but first let's talk about the known murderers here. Edwards was known to have murdered 5 people. The first murders for which Edwards was convicted of Billy Lavaco and Judy Straub, a double murder, took place in Ohio in 1977. He received life sentences for those crimes in 2010. The second pair of murders were of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, another double homicide in Wisconsin in 1980. Those were referred to as the Sweetheart murders. Edwards has also been questioned at the time, but there was no basis to hold him. Almost 29 years later, his connection to the crime was established by means of DNA testing. Apparently, Edwards' own child tipped off police about his possible involvement. Lastly, Edwards confessed to the 1996 murder of Danny Boy Edwards in Ohio. The victim was referred to as an adopted child who lived with Edwards and his wife for several years. Danny's original name was Danny Law Glockner. Edwards murdered Danny Boy in a scheme to collect insurance money. He was sentenced to death for this crime in March 2011, but died in prison of natural causes a month later. And in the research I've done on this, I do think it's worth noting, I found an interview where he is in jail. It's right before he died. And he is telling the interviewer that he actually never adopted Danny Boy. This is a man that was a bit older, had kicked around the community a little bit, lived with some other people, and they told Edward Edwards that they were about to put him out, and if he could go live with Ed Edwards, that that might be good for him. So Ed Edwards and his wife took this young man in, had him join the military. He was then going to be deployed somewhere he didn't want to go. And Ed Edwards concocted this whole scheme of this insurance money that he was going to collect for killing this young man. And it's pretty interesting to see him retell this story because of how disconnected he is about the actual act of killing this young man. However, what's also interesting about it is how open and loose he is about telling this story. And I really got the sense when I was watching, it's a 3-part segment as usual. I'll have links down in the description box below. But as I watched this series, I really had a sense that he was trying to come clean and he was being very honest about all of these murders. And we'll speak a bit more about those in a little bit. But what does it take to turn someone into a murderer like this? Let's check his background a little. Edwards was born in Akron, Ohio. He grew up primarily as an orphan after witnessing the suicide of his mother. In his autobiography, Edwards claimed that he was abused both physically and emotionally in an orphanage, which contributed to his criminal behavior. He was allowed to get out of juvenile detention to join the U.S. Marines, went AWOL, and was subsequently discharged. He then returned to his criminal lifestyle. He traveled frequently during his 20s and 30s, doing odd jobs such as working as a ship docker, vacuum retailer, and handyman. He lived most of his life when not incarcerated in Louisville, Kentucky. This is the first of the slides we're going to check out from Hawaiian Girl. She has a little more info. At 6 years old, he was taken in by Lillian's sister and husband, Fred Kay, and Mary Ethel Edwards, according to the 1940 U.S. Census records. In 1937, Mary Ethel suffered from multiple sclerosis and in 1940 sent him to an orphanage in Ohio. He was 7 years old and remained at Parmadale Orphanage until they rejected him in 1945 as being a bad influence to the other boys and with multiple runaway attempts. So even a little rougher than we hear at the Wikipedia article. This is really a young man that it seems like he didn't have a very good start in life. Witnesses his mother apparently shoot herself and then die later in the hospital, and is not only handed off to other people, those other people can't keep him and give him away to an orphanage. So definitely a bit of a bumpy start for Edward Edwards. This is a clip from that interview that I was mentioning. Let's just watch a little bit of it.
I said there was some money in that down in the bottom of the duffel bag, and he was bent over, kneeling down and feeling around. Is when I shot him. He didn't even know I had a shotgun. Is when I shot him in the chest.
So you're admitting to being a cold-blooded killer then?
In fact, yeah, that's right.
In court.
As you can see, like I mentioned, just this strange disconnect, and he has no problem admitting that he is a killer. He was talking in this case about when he shot his, quote, adopted son, Danny. And he goes into great detail about that whole insurance scam. It's not the first insurance scam that he's done. He burned down several of his houses, collected insurance money around those cases. One of those cases is why he went to jail earlier in his life. So this seemed to be a pattern for him of committing that type of crime. This is where we have to introduce Detective John Cameron. Now, he is the author of this new book, It's Me. And I can tell you, after looking into a bunch of research on this case and trying to backtrace where people are coming up with the opinion of Ed Edwards being tied to the Stephen Avery case, it seems like most of them go right back to this book. And as I mentioned, John Cameron is accusing Ed Edwards of many other crimes. And it gets a bit difficult to kind of digest it all, because so many of these crimes are extremely high-profile cases that we all have heard about at some point in our life. And you begin to wonder, is this really feasible? In one way, it almost feels like John Cameron is writing a book about the Santa Claus of murder, this guy that can just do it all and pops up all around the world to kill people. And you have to wonder, is that really plausible? Is it feasible? Is there information to back it? And does that information hold up? This is a page from coldcasecameron.com. This is basically the website where he hosts a lot of his information and sells his book. And he has a bio on himself. John A. Cameron is a 53-year-old retired police detective from Great Falls, Montana. His career in law enforcement began in 1979. He retired in 2005 as a sergeant of detectives working cold cases. He has worked on FBI serial killer task forces, catching ritualistic child cannibal killer Nathan Bar-Jonah. His cases have been featured on America's Most Wanted, Dateline NBC, and he helped produce a series known as Most Evil True TV. I don't know if it's really a credit to note that your cases were featured on America's Most Wanted, because typically those were still open cases. But in 2010, while working as an analyst for the Montana Board of Pardons and Parole in Deer Lodge Prison, Montana, he was in a position to access information that had been kept secret for 55 years, unraveling the most intelligent serial killer ever. And he has a summary of his education, a lot of education here, and, you know, he seems credible. This is a man that has definitely lived the type of life and has the experience to conduct an investigation like this. So, specifically for this video, I asked Hawaiian Girl to look into the Zodiac Killer, the Adam Walsh case, and the Stephen Avery case, because they're all things that I've talked about on different shows on this channel. So here are some notes about the Zodiac. We have on December 20th, 1968, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen murdered on Lover's Lane. July 4th, 1969, Michael Mageau and Darlene Farron murdered on Lover's Lane. Actually, if I remember right, I think Michael might have survived that, but it's been a while since I reviewed that case. September 27th, 1969, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. I believe that they were attacked, and I think they both survived, if I recall correctly. And then October 13th, 1969, Paul Stein, who, if I remember right, is the cab driver that was murdered, and a piece of his shirt was sent into the police to prove that the Zodiac notes were really tied to the real Zodiac Killer. So if we line that up to Edward Wayne Edwards here, on August 8th, 1977, Billy Lavaco and Judy Straub, and they're murdered, and it's called the Sweetheart Murders. That's a Lover's Lane type murder. On August 9th, 1980, Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, also a Sweetheart murder. And in March or April, Danny Law Glockner, which we know he was murdered for insurance money. So just looking at the bare facts here, I think it's pretty easy for someone to make some quick assumptions. First of all, one thing that we're all kind of conditioned to is the thought that serial killers repeat patterns. They fall in love with a certain type of killing, and they like to do that over and over. And if you look at this, it appears as though these could be connected, and you could say, well, you have someone that is into killing pairs of people, particularly lovers, in a situation where they might be making out in a car or something like that. Where it gets a little bit strange for me is when you consider the video footage of his kind of open talk right before his death. He talks about each of these instances of these couple killings, and they are people that he knew, people he interacted with. The second killing, I believe he says, was a total accident. He originally punched the guy in the throat, and then the woman attacked him, and she was screaming, and he felt like he had to silence her, so he choked her. What's interesting is the official story on those killings is a bit different, saying that those people were tied up and tortured and stabbed. That doesn't quite line up with what he's saying in prison. But the first instance, both of those people were shot, and he has a story about that, saying that the man was, I guess, kind of being lewd or making eyes at Ed Edwards' children, and he'd warned the man several times. He went and found the man at some point with his gun and shot the man, but the man said his name before he shot him, so then he was forced to kill the woman because of his identity. And apparently it worked because he was able to get away with that crime for decades. So that's a bit different than the Zodiac Killer case, where we actually have survivors. We have people that the Zodiac Killer played with, kind of tortured. We know in one case in particular, he tied them up, he stabbed them multiple times, he wore this mask, he was trying to conceal his identity. So it's a bit of a rough fit for me. I'm not sure if it totally lines up. That being said, let's check out what else we have here. Similarities. Brian Hartnell survived the Zodiac stabbing and gave a description to police. The suspect mentioned having been in Deer Lodge prison, having escaped and stealing a car. He was barrel-chested, 5'8" to 6 feet, dark-haired and heavy-set, wearing a black hood that appeared professionally sewn with the Zodiac symbol on the front. Betty Jensen, in the first Zodiac attack, was shot 5 times in the back. So Edwards made the FBI's 10 Most Wanted in 1961 for bank robbery. I don't think we've ever heard of any other crimes outside of murders being tied to the Zodiac Killer. If you know different on that, drop it in the comments below for me. He was arrested in '62, received a 15-year sentence, served 5. He was released from Deer Lodge in 1967. So that's a bit of a interesting connection. We do have a mention of the same prison across. We know that Ed Edwards was in that prison, and the Zodiac Killer used that prison as part of his story in one of his cases. While at Deer Lodge, Edwards meets Frank Dryman. Frank is allegedly to be Edwards' first setup. Dryman, born and raised in Vallejo, California, and was a cryptologist in the Navy that was discharged due to mental problems in 1949. He was picked up in Montana after shooting a man 5 times in the back. He was known at the prison to parade around the prison wearing a black Catholic Cossack with the Zodiac cross on circle. So from that, you can say possibly Ed Edwards was inspired by this man and then used parts of his story maybe as a cover-up in these other cases. But when you start thinking about that, the Zodiac Killer, I believe, intended on killing those people. I don't believe that he intended for them to survive, especially multiple stabbings, being tied up and left on a little island on the coast, or a little jetty off of the mainland. So I think it's a bit weird that he would feel like he would have to cover himself by laying out that thick of a story. Can Edwards be placed in California? Well, if we follow Cameron's information about Edwards' book being a key to the puzzle, then yes, it does provide information that Edwards was familiar with the Bay Area during the time of the Zodiac killings. Also, a cousin of Edwards, JonBenet, provided Cameron with a photo from the 1970s with Edwards in it at Christmas with other family members. A direct research also shows her family living in that area at the time. I've also seen a note that Ed Edwards had written. He was requesting all of his criminal files, and he did mention being in the California area, particularly Sacramento. I don't think he said San Francisco, if I remember correctly, but he was in the Northern California area, so there is a little something that could tie him there. Here is that family picture. We can see Ed right here in the center. It is worth noting, though, it's a picture during the holidays. You know, some people travel to see their family during the holidays. This doesn't necessarily put him as living in that area during the time of this. On the Cold Case Cameron site, there is actually a timeline that Ed Edwards' daughter had put together of all the places that he lived. Unfortunately, it doesn't start until the mid-70s, so we don't have information from her that can confirm or refute this claim that he might have been in the Bay Area. Here's another possible connection, potentially placing him in San Francisco. In an interview with JonBenet Edwards' cousin, she tells Cameron that her mother Beatrice worked at Lefty O'Doul's, located in the theater district in San Francisco at the intersection of Mason and Geary. This is recorded as the very intersection that Zodiac got into the cab of Paul Stine. Dawn followed with, "My mom lived a couple blocks away from where Stine was killed." On page 392 of Edwards' book, he quoted his aunt belittling him upon his release from Lewisburg in 1967. "Ed, please get out of the cab about 2 blocks from our house, will you? People around here have heard you've been released from prison and our neighbors will be watching." So we have an address potentially tied to the pickup spot for the Zodiac Killer. Although Mason and Geary, that's a pretty heavy populated area. A lot of people work around that area. And then, of course, the drop-off spot being a few blocks from that home, it certainly gets me to scratch my brain just a little bit. But it's still not a very solid connection in my eyes. Another similarity here, the Zodiac sent ciphers to media and police toying with them. To date, officially only one of the ciphers is solved, and in it states that he is collecting slaves for the afterlife. According to Ed Edwards' book and Cameron's researcher Neil Best. On to page 232, speaking of an inmate at Deer Lodge Prison, quote, "This demented individual showed an overwhelming interest in science fiction and Egyptian literature. He believed anyone he killed would be his slave in the next life." Once again, this is really feeling to me like he was in prison with the Zodiac Killer. Not necessarily that that was him. Or is he potentially covering for himself by sharing this information in that way? You know, like when you talk to your doctor and you go, "Hey, a friend of mine's having this problem." Is that what's going on here? I really am not certain. This is a breakdown of one of the ciphers, and in short, a key was made where this signature can be turned into Ed Edwards. Now the question is, how much do you believe in this key? Is this really valid? And that I'm not sure of. It is pretty interesting that there is exactly enough letters here for it to spell out Edward Edwards. So that is certainly another interesting twist here. Here we have another cipher that someone has done some work on, and with them making these rule changes, it does come out to say I'm Edward E. But once again, the thing for me is you have to wonder about these rules to make this cipher work. You know, people can do very creative things with these rules, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that's really what's going on in this cipher. Recognition. Both the Zodiac and Edwards enjoyed recognition. Zodiac by sending letters and puzzles to media for years, and Edwards writing an autobiography, which became the key to tracking his crimes. Edwards toured the country talking about his life and his book. So yeah, they definitely both seem to enjoy attention. Adam Walsh. So as you know, we covered the Adam Walsh story last week. And during that, I bumped into some information about Edward Wayne Edwards being part of it, so I sent that to Hawaiian 808 Girl for her to look into. Now, I'm pretty sure this is information she got from John Cameron's website, because the way he phrases things, I could see it's happening in here. But the short of it is, the Walshes were on Good Morning America at the time, begging for the safe return of their son. This is the day that the head was found. And according to Mr. Cameron, Edwards had placed Walsh's head to be found on the anniversary date of his mother's funeral. And then he also taunted John Walsh for 2 decades with anonymous letters. Here, the Scorpion letters come up. I just feel like I have questions that start to pop up when we look at things like this, and especially when they're worded like that. A lot of John Cameron's information doesn't say that he thinks that Ed Edwards did this, sent these anonymous letters. He's saying that he actually did. And I would love to have the underlying connection pieces to how he can prove that or how he makes that work. From what I see here, this is an anonymous letter. If you read through it, it does feel a little bit like something potentially the Zodiac might have done. Scorpion, Zodiac, I mean, it's kind of I could see that potentially coming from the same mindset, but I don't know how to tie these directly to Ed Edwards. And even if you do that, does that necessarily tie this letter to being the true murderer of Adam Walsh? There's still another gap there that has to be addressed. This page has a bit of what I consider kind of conspiracy theory numerology. It seems to come up a lot in cases that I research where people try to find numbers and equate those numbers to each other to provide meanings. So I'm not going to go over all of it. You can check it out on BrainScratchers.com in the deep dive files if you want to go note by note here. But it's just another thing. We do know that the Zodiac was tied into cryptology, obviously, so maybe there is something to all this numerology. But personally, when I try to look into things like this, I never come out finding anything very tangible, so I'm not sure if there's really something in here or not. It is worth noting on this, while some may see a pattern in the Scorpion letters, the FBI has stated that it and the ciphers are not from or similar to the Zodiac Killer. And then, of course, we have that O'Toole confessed to the murder of Adam Walsh, although there are a lot of investigators that don't believe that he did it. So now we get to Edwards and the Avery theory. I'm not going to go through all of these points, but let's jump to the second one here. Cameron said Edwards killed several of his victims on Halloween. Halbeck disappeared from the Avery junkyard on October 31st, 2005. At least for the crimes that he was convicted of, none of those occurred on Halloween. So once again, I have to ask for some underlying information here from Mr. Cameron that can help us bridge that understanding a bit. Edwards reportedly only lived an hour away from the Avery junkyard at the time of the murder. This is interesting because if you go to John Cameron's own website, there's that document that I mentioned previously that Ed Edwards' daughter has put together of where they lived. And I checked that document myself, and it appears that they were living in Louisville, Kentucky at this time, and that is far more than 1 hour away from Hollywood, Florida. As a matter of fact, that other document I mentioned, where Ed Edwards was requesting all of his criminal history and files, he does not state Hollywood, Florida as being a place where he conducted any crimes or has any record. That being said, that doesn't mean he didn't commit a crime there. It's just he knows that there was no investigation on a crime there that he was related to. So that would lead me to believe that the Adam Walsh connection is a little bit shaky. And of course, Cameron also posted on his blog that a man who looks a lot like Edwards is in a scene on episode 6 of the Netflix documentary. Here is a picture of that scene. There are many YouTube videos kicking around about this. Some people are saying they've tried to track this man down and they can't. Even with all of that, I cannot look at this picture and say that that's Ed Edwards. It is a man similar in stature. I can say that much, but I can't really say more than that. And then, of course, there's this letter. John Cameron is saying this was written by Ed Edwards and sent in. However, I still haven't seen any information to how he would have that, because this letter was sent anonymously. And you can see it's written in pretty rough handwriting. I think I'm right-handed, and I think if I was going to write something like that, I'd do it with my left hand just to throw people off, I guess. But I have not seen any information from John Cameron that really ties this very well to coming from Ed Edwards, though he states that Ed Edwards wrote this. And here we have some conclusions by Hawaiian Girl, and most notably is this one in the center for me, because with my researchers, I do ask for their opinion about what is going on also. And she's the one that read both of these books. Even I haven't done that yet, so she's definitely got a bit more invested and more knowledge around this. In connection to the Adam Walsh case and the Avery case, while again there are some connections, those two cases in particular don't solidify for me that Edwards committed those. And I feel like I have to agree with her assessment there. The Zodiac one is a bit more compelling, especially because we know that he murdered 2 pairs of couples. But if you watch him retelling the story of what happened in those cases, for me, that dissolved a lot of the feeling that he was also the Zodiac Killer. As a matter of fact, as I went over all this research, I really started looking more at John Cameron. I wanted more of his information to be validated for me, and I looked at it in several different ways, and it just couldn't quite happen. There's just some pieces that really didn't fit together, and then there's some pieces that blatantly don't fit, and we're going to do a quick review of that. Before we do a review of that, here is one other photo, supposedly, where Ed Edwards put himself in a documentary about murders. This one is Paradise Lost, the Robin Hood Hills murders. And John Cameron is saying this is a photo of Ed Edwards from that documentary. And once again, I can't verify that this is him. I've actually looked at pictures side by side of this and known pictures of Ed Edwards, and I note some considerable differences. Mainly the distance between this man's nose and his mouth do not seem to match up for me, but this is definitely a very blurry picture. Once again, I just wish that John Cameron gave us some more information to connect this. It would mean a lot more if he had an expert review those two pictures and then posted that expert's opinion, rather than an already drawn conclusion of this is Ed Edwards and he likes putting himself in movies about him, so this is how he did it here. And by the way, he's also in Making a Murderer. Here's a still shot from that. I want to know how you validate that information. I'm just not quite getting it. So real quick, let's just do a quick dance through the coldcasecameron.com front page only. And it is worth noting he's got the killer's timeline, which if you click through here, you can see all the cases that he's trying to tie together as being related to Edward Wayne Edwards. And it's a lot of information. Admittedly, I have not looked through this thing from top to bottom. There is so much information to review here, but the few pieces that I poked into and tried to dive into a bit deeper, found some interesting stuff. Let's take a look here. So right near the top of his page here, there's a claim that he had been killing and setting people up for 66 years undetected. Edwards was first captured on July 30th, 2009 in Jefferson, Wisconsin. That's actually not true because he served time before that. I'm not sure what he means by first captured there. Edward Wayne Edwards is the killer of Teresa Halbach and setup of Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. Very big and bold claim. This is not a theory the way this is written. This man is stating this as a fact. From that, he goes into the 5 cases that we do know about. So these we know. We have his confession in video right here. And then we get to this case about the Coleman case. And this is where my giant question mark starts lighting up over my head very hard. What is the information that's being presented here? And he claims that in this writing, you will find the name Edward. And once again, this kind of feels like this weird shape here, E, and then this, he sees this as a D. I just see that as a tagger that is not letting the can go at the right time, and he's making this extra tail here, and you can see it kind of gets lighter as it goes off. Here you can see where he's retracing Ed, and I don't even know what these letters are. This is just not very strong for me, especially not being presented in this way. It seems a bit sensationalized to me, and it's not giving me enough information. Like, I don't even know what these are supposed to be spelling here. Here, yes, Ed, I get it. What is this? Okay, that could be a U, but that's not what's actually painted here. So what are you trying to tell me with that? Oh, W. Okay. I just, this isn't enough. This really is not enough. And I could make, hey, my own name is in there somewhere. J-O-N, right there. It's just missing the H. I don't get this. He then goes into all of the appearances that Ed Edwards made promoting his book, and he actually hosts a copy of his book here, which I'm not sure if there was still book sales happening on that book, but I would imagine any of those proceeds would have gone to the family, but apparently not. Mr. Cameron is hosting the book here for free, so you guys can check it out there if you like. Here, okay, now this is where I get a little bit nutty. I'm just going to say it, okay? It makes me nutty. I am a former data person. I used to work for the entertainment companies, some very big companies, in terms of handling their data, reporting on their data, making entire systems for their data that they didn't have before that. So I would still consider myself a bit of a data expert. This graph here, he's trying to show homicide victimization rates, and then red indicates when Edwards was in prison. Essentially, he's trying to tell the story that at a national level of rate per 100,000, that these crimes are somehow related to Edwards, and when he goes in prison, like in this red block here, it goes down. What does this block say? What does this block say? The only one that even supports his argument that maybe this guy was responsible for this incredible crime, which we are talking rate per 100,000. How many citizens are in this nation? This is for all of the United States. For him to affect a chart on this level is practically impossible unless he was killing, I would have to estimate, hundreds of people a year. That's the only way he could even put a ding on this chart. This is really, honestly, this is throwaway information. This is not communicating anything valid. Just my opinion as a former data expert, this is a complete waste of time to look at. Here we have a picture of the Zodiac Killer next to a picture of Ed Edwards. You know, he's a white male, and we've got a white male. It's very hard because this composite sketch doesn't have a lot of very identifiable features outside of the glasses, and obviously we don't have glasses over here. Outside of that, is this a match? I don't know. You tell me. Okay, so here is that timeline I was telling you about from his daughter April. And if we look in the one that has 1980, here we go. 1980 to 1981, and from 1981 forward, you can see they were in Pennsylvania. They were in Pittsburgh, and then they were in Portersville. They were not in Florida during this time frame. So this information pretty much should take him out of consideration for committing the Adam Walsh crime, unless you think that he did it driving through the area at the time, that it wasn't about where he was living, but he was vacationing there or something like that, which is certainly possible. But this would be a pretty big knock against that theory. Here we have a piece of a letter, and from what I can read about this, it sounds like this is correspondence that actually went on between John Cameron and Ed Edwards. And unfortunately, this is just a little clip of the letter that happens to mention the Zodiac Killer. And from this little clip, it sounds like they are having a conversation about the Zodiac, about trying to figure out who he is. I think it's being presented here as if it's a taunt, but that is not the context that I read here. He's saying literally, good luck. I bet I have more answers than you do. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's saying he's the killer. As we've heard from that other information previously, I think he believes he was in prison with the killer. And Ed Edwards was known to name drop a little bit. He's referred to Jimmy Hoffa, he's referred to Hoover. So I think there's just this thing, he's a bit of a name dropper. He wants to act like he's associated to these semi-famous people, and I think he sees the Zodiac, especially because he's a killer himself. He sees the Zodiac as some type of celebrity. We have him tying him to the Black Dahlia murders. We have him talking about the JonBenet Ramsey case here. It literally goes on and on and on. However, this section in particular, he says, starting in 1996, Ed Edwards started blogging on Google, challenging the bloggers to identify him. And then we have a quote here from Edward Wayne Edwards speaking on Google below. I believe that beginning in the 1960s or 1970s, a new type of serial killer began to operate. I call him the undetectable serial killer. This is a serial killer so brilliant, so organized, so in control of himself and his emotions, so determined to avoid capture, and so lacking in any desire for notoriety or publicity that he or she is or was able to commit at least 50 individual killings and perhaps as many as 500 killings. Now, first of all, if we know about the Zodiac and even Ed Edwards, he certainly does not fit this condition of lacking in any desire for notoriety or publicity. And as you can see down here, he actually credits him first up here, Edward Wayne Edwards, speaking on Google below, and then Edward Wayne Edwards, January 8th, 1997, Google True Crime Blogs. I highlighted this section because I wanted to see what the heck this guy was talking about, and I found it. And here it is. It's actually the part of a longer reply here by someone named Gen 1 Orbit. And you can see that it happens in the middle of her, I'm assuming it's a her, with her name being Jen, post, and it is literally word for word. Outside of that, if you read through the rest of it and the replies to it, this is just a normal conversation. There is nothing to tell me that Gen 1 Orbit is Ed Edwards. As a matter of fact, the first commenter, I think he nails it. This is more Hollywood than reality, is his comment in responding to some of her assumptions about this perfect criminal. I don't know why you present information in this way. This does not make sense to me unless you are trying to mislead people. And it's tough because John Cameron has actually been in touch with Hawaiian 808 Girl. As I mentioned earlier, we have sent some information that apparently he didn't have, some public records information. He is even sending a hard copy edition of his book to Hawaiian 808 Girl. I really would like for him, if he sees this, as a matter of fact, I might send it to her for his review. John, please do us a favor. These questions that I've raised in this episode of BrainScratch, please tell us just how to rectify this information. How do we connect this Gen 1 account, Gen 1 Orbit? How do we know that that's Ed Edwards? How do we account for the discrepancies in the timelines you're presenting here versus the crimes you're saying he committed in other parts of the world? How can we fill some of these gaps so that this information becomes more sturdy? And quite honestly, proving those gaps, I would think, would be an excellent way of further promoting your book and getting more people to buy into the theories that you're proposing. Obviously, you have a ton of experience in this area of doing cold case investigations. I am just not sure why we're not seeing how these puzzle pieces get connected here. But it was pretty tough, honestly. It was a bit of a tough morning for me because when I started this, I really wanted to see some of these connections come together and be able to share them with you guys. And the more I looked into these connections, the less I was able to find. And then, like in that last instance, there's a certain place where the information literally falls apart. So at this point, I was kind of agreeing with Hawaiian Girl that I don't think he was connected to Adam Walsh. I don't think he was connected to Steve Avery. At this point, I honestly don't even think he's connected to the Zodiac Killer. At least with the information that we've reviewed as it's been presented by that website. This is just a quick page from Reddit, and they're talking about the assumption that the murders took place in October. And we've got a few commenters here. He was linked to 5 murders. The first 4 happened in the months of August. There's also no mention whatsoever that he intentionally tried to frame anybody. It seems like the cold case worker is trying to use the making a murderer hype to sell more books, since most people won't bother to fact check his claims. Another commenter here, I've not found corroboration other than from Cameron on any of those points. The info that sold me was that he likes to murder on Halloween, and that was the same on the docu video. Now I look closer, I don't think either are true. Cameron is a spaghetti head. I don't think Cameron is necessarily a spaghetti head, but I do think that there might be some aspect of him trying to sell books here. And this is something that you've heard me talk about a lot in these cases, particularly with authors. There is, I don't know if it's a self-deception, but there's this strange place that some authors go to, I think, where they think if they sensationalize that story, if they push the boundary of reality a little bit out of the way and let some things go, maybe they'll be able to sell more books. I sincerely hope that isn't the case here. But, you know, this guy is no longer I guess, an active investigator, he is now an author, and it is his job to sell books. It just reminds me also of the two detectives from the Smiley Case murders. We've got two guys that put together this whole theory based on extremely public information, and now anytime that a body shows up in a body of water somewhere, they go looking for smiley face spray paint somewhere, and that's part of their theory also. I don't know if these detectives have trouble in their retirement, if they don't want to let go of that type of work, and now they don't have access to the type of information they did before, so they start looking to the media and pulling together a case based on the media. But as we know in this show, the media does not present very good information, not very solid information, and not information that you could really pull together for theories like this. So I don't know. John, if you're watching this, I really hope, please continue to send us information that backs these claims. We can do follow-up episodes, and we can absolutely change opinions. When I've started cases at one point, and within discovery, going through discovery and hearing other people's information and reviewing other information, I've wound up at other points. So just based on my starting point for this, I'm extremely, extremely skeptical. Also worth noting, John Cameron has his own YouTube, and this is his most recent video. He's literally burning a copy of his own book. And for some reason, the comments have been disabled. I don't know if this is just an advertising thing or some type of PR thing, but I did find it interesting that the imagery of burning your own book would wind up on someone's YouTube channel. Outside of that, he has a few videos, so I'll have a link to his YouTube channel also in the description box below. A couple of videos that are related to the Ed Edwards investigation stuff, and a bunch of videos of him playing piano, which he's a very good piano player, but unfortunately the Ed Edwards videos get a lot more views. I just want to leave all of you brain scratchers with this quote. It just popped in my head while I was doing this investigation. This is our good pal Albert Einstein. You do not really understand something unless you could explain it to your grandmother. That's all I'm asking for here. Please explain it to us. Hawaiian 808 Girl, thank you so much for the research. Brain Scratchers out there, please be sure to go to brainscratchers.com, dive into her slides, go through the whole thing. And if you guys come up with other theories, supporting information, information that doesn't quite prove, or if it proves or disproves, please, please, please send it our way, put it in the description or in the comments below, and we will check it out. And I'm pretty sure there's a very good chance we'll have a continuation on this story at some point, because there's a lot of information around it, so a lot for you guys to dig into. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition. I will catch you next time on the next show on the Geek and Dorks channel. Have a great weekend and take care.